The lawyer's office carried the heavy scent of aged leather, polished wood, and a faint whiff of disappointment that seemed to cling to the air. My siblings sat across from me, dressed in their meticulously tailored designer clothes, their faces barely concealing the glee they felt as Mr. Whitman, the family attorney, cleared his throat and began reading Grandma Cecilia's will. His voice was steady, deliberate, as he announced the bequests: $3 million for Brandon, $3 million for Ashley, and $3 million for Marcus. Properties, sprawling estates, and city apartments were to be divided equally among them. Investment portfolios, brimming with lucrative stocks, were transferred into their names. Even Grandma's cherished jewelry collection, the one I'd spent countless summers helping her catalog, marveling at each sparkling piece, was split 3 ways, as if I'd never touched it. Then came my name. And to my granddaughter, Josephine Marie Caldwell, Mr. Whitman said, pausing to adjust his wire-rimmed glasses, I leave the contents of Safety Deposit Box 447 at First National Bank on Meridian Street. That was it. No millions, no properties, no glittering jewels. Just a safety deposit box, its contents a mystery. A ripple of smug satisfaction passed through the room. Brandon let out a derisive snort. Figures, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Even in death, Grandma knew Joey was the family disappointment. Our mother offered a weak protest, murmuring, Brandon, please, but her eyes were already scanning the inheritance tax paperwork, mentally tallying her children's newfound wealth. Ashley didn't bother hiding her smirk. Maybe it's some old savings bonds, she said, her tone mocking. You know, just enough to cover those student loans from that art degree of yours. Marcus, the eldest and always the cruelest, was already distracted, scrolling through his phone. Probably just her old photos and worthless mementos, he muttered. Grandma was always sentimental about junk. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, as Mr. Whitman slid a small envelope across the mahogany table. My name was written on it in Grandma's unmistakable spidery handwriting. Inside was a single brass key, spotted with rust, attached to a worn leather tag that simply read for 47. That was all, that's it. Ashley laughed, her voice sharp and cutting. Joey gets a rusty key to what? A box of costume jewelry. Marcus stood, stretching, as if the matter was already settled. Seems fitting, he said, his tone dismissive. The worthless grandchild gets worthless junk. He pulled out his phone again, showing me photos he'd posted that morning, photos from Grandma's house. My childhood artwork, sketches I'd poured my heart into, old Polaroids of me with Grandma, letters I'd written her from college, all reduced to ashes in the backyard fire pit. Cleaned out your old room, he said casually, as if it were nothing. Made space for my home office. Grandma's house is mine now, after all. I fingered the rusty key in my pocket, its edges rough against my skin, and stayed silent. Let them talk. Let them gloat. Let them sign every document Mr. Whitman placed before them with their eager, greedy fingers, their pens scratching like vultures picking at a carcass. As they busied themselves with their windfall, Mr. Whitman leaned toward me, his voice low and measured. Miss Caldwell, he said quietly, the bank closes at 5. You might want to visit sooner rather than later. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of knowledge, perhaps even a hint of amusement. I nodded once, understanding that there was more to this moment than my siblings could possibly comprehend. That afternoon, the funeral unfolded like a carefully staged performance, a lavish affair orchestrated by my siblings to flaunt their newfound wealth. Brandon delivered a hollow speech about family legacy, his wrist adorned with a gleaming new Rolex that caught the light with every gesture. Ashley dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her performance of grief as calculated as it was unconvincing. Marcus spoke of preserving Grandma's memory, all while standing in the house where he'd burned my cherished mementos. I sat in the back row, the rusty key a heavy weight in my pocket, its presence grounding me amidst the hypocrisy. After the service, relatives I hadn't seen in years suddenly remembered my name. Joey, dear, Aunt Patricia cooed, her voice thick with false sympathy. I heard about the will. So unfair. But then, you were never really close to Cecilia, were you? I met her gaze evenly. She left me what she wanted me to have, I said simply. Uncle Robert let out a hearty laugh. What, her cookie jar, he scoffed. I smiled, said nothing, and slipped away early. Let them gossip. Let them pity poor Joey with her art degree and her rusty key. They didn't need to know what I was beginning to suspect, that Grandma's gift was more than it seemed. First National Bank on Meridian Street was a relic of a bygone era, its marble columns and polished brass fixtures exuding an air of timeless authority. Mrs. Chin, the kindly woman at the safety deposit desk, greeted me with a warm smile. Miss Caldwell, she said, her eyes crinkling, we've been expecting you. She took the rusty key, turning it over in her hands as if it were a precious artifact. Box 447, she confirmed. Your grandmother was very specific about the instructions for this box. Instructions? I asked, my curiosity piqued. She led me through the vault, past rows of identical steel boxes, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She said you must come alone, Mrs. Chin explained. She said you should come only after the others had signed everything. And she said you'd understand why when you opened it. Her eyes twinkled with a knowing glint, as if she were in on a secret I was about to uncover. Box 447 was larger than I'd imagined, its heavy door swinging open to reveal 3 items: a thick manila envelope bulging with documents, a worn leather journal I recognized instantly, and a modern silver key attached to a tag inscribed with geographic coordinates. I reached for the journal first, its familiar cover stirring memories of summers spent with Grandma. It was her investment diary, the one she'd kept meticulously for 60 years, the one my siblings swore didn't exist when they ransacked her study in search of financial records. I opened it to the final entry, dated just a week before her death, and began to read. My dearest Joey, the entry began, in Grandma's elegant, looping script. By now, your siblings have gleefully divided what they believe is my entire estate. Let them. The money I left them is real, enough to keep them satisfied, comfortable, and blissfully ignorant. What they don't know is that the millions they've inherited represent exactly 15% of my actual wealth. You see, my darling girl, while your brothers and sisters spent their visits prying into my will, checking my bank statements, and cataloging my possessions, you spent yours asking about my life. You listened to my stories, not to appraise my assets, but to understand my heart. And in those stories, I told you everything. I read on, my breath catching as she unraveled the truth. She wrote of the foolish investment her father had mocked shares in a little Seattle coffee company called Starbucks that had turned into a fortune. She described the useless land in Austin she'd bought in the 1970s, parcels my siblings had derisively called Grandma's Dirt Collection, now sitting in the heart of the city's booming tech district. The silver key, she explained, was more than a tool to open a box. It was the key to everything she'd kept hidden from grasping hands and greedy hearts. The manila envelope contained the details of her true legacy: deeds to 47 commercial properties across 7 states, investment portfolios valued at approximately $280 million. Art collections stored in climate-controlled vaults, including the Monet my brother had dismissed as a fake, a vineyard in France my sister swore was a fantasy, publishing rights to my grandfather's patents, and the crown jewel, an 1,800-acre ranch in Montana where I'd spent my happiest summers learning to ride horses and paint landscapes. All of it was held in trusts and companies my siblings never knew existed, all waiting for the one grandchild who loved her for who she was, not for what she could give. Grandma's letter included one condition. Written with a firmness that felt like her voice speaking directly to me: you must never share this wealth with your siblings, not out of cruelty, but because they've already shown you who they are. Brandon burned your memories. Ashley mocked your dreams. Marcus destroyed what you loved. They chose their inheritance, cash they could count and spend. Now, choose yours. The silver key leads to the ranch, where your real inheritance awaits. It isn't money, Joey. It's freedom. The freedom to create, to live, to be exactly who you are without apologizing to anyone. She ended with a postscript. Mr. Whitman has been my lawyer for 40 years. He's the only one who knows the truth. Trust him. He has instructions to help you claim everything properly and quietly. A second postscript followed, about the rusty key. It's from my first apartment, where I started with nothing. I kept it to remind myself that wealth isn't what you're given, it's what you build. You, my dear, have been building all your life. I sat in the small vault room, the journal open in my lap, and cried, not from grief, for I'd mourned Grandma already, but from the overwhelming weight of her faith in me. While my siblings saw a struggling artist, an unmarried granddaughter who couldn't afford their world of designer labels and luxury cars, Grandma saw the truth. She saw the girl who spent summers learning her recipes instead of asking for handouts, who organized her photos instead of appraising her jewelry, who asked about her childhood in Poland instead of her stock portfolio. She saw me. I called Mr. Whitman from the bank, my voice trembling with awe. She left me everything, I whispered. Not everything, he corrected gently, his tone warm and knowing. She left them what they expected, money. She left you what they never understood was valuable. He explained that my siblings had signed ironclad documents, accepting their inheritance as complete and final. They couldn't contest what they didn't know existed. Your grandmother was a brilliant woman, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. She structured everything perfectly. Shall we meet tomorrow to begin the transfers? I hung up and looked at the silver key, its polished surface catching the vault's dim light. The coordinates pointed to Montana, to the ranch where I'd spent my happiest summers, where Grandma taught me to ride, to paint, to see beauty in the wild, untamed world, a place my siblings had never bothered to visit, too far from their idea of civilization. That evening, I attended a family dinner at Marcus's house, Grandma's house, now is by their reckoning. They toasted their good fortune with champagne that cost more than my monthly salary, their laughter loud and careless. At least Joey can afford to eat tonight, Ashley said, gesturing at the elaborate spread with a mocking grin. Consider it our charity. Brandon, already drunk, chimed in. Maybe we should set up a fund for her, the Failed Artist Relief Foundation. I smiled, sipped my water, and let them talk. Marcus showed off plans to gut Grandma's beloved gardens for a swimming pool. Ashley bragged about quitting her job to become an investor. Brandon had already bought 2 sports cars. What about you, Joey? Mom asked, her voice tinged with pity. Will you be all right? I know Grandma's oversight must hurt. I'll be fine, I said, my voice calm and steady. Honestly, Grandma left me exactly what she meant to, a rusty key. Marcus laughed, his voice booming. To what? Did you even check? I did, I replied, meeting his gaze. And it opened what it was supposed to open. Ashley pressed, sensing something beneath my calm demeanor. A door to what? I stood, gathering my things. To the future Grandma wanted me to have, I said simply. Good night. The next morning, I met with Mr. Whitman to begin the quiet, meticulous process of claiming my real inheritance. By the end of the week, I was worth more than my siblings could earn in 10 lifetimes. But I didn't rush out to buy sports cars or designer clothes. I didn't quit my job at the art gallery or move from my modest apartment, not yet. Instead, I flew to Montana, the silver key in my pocket, and drove to the ranch. The sprawling 1,800-acre property stretched out before me, its rolling hills and distant mountains as breathtaking as I remembered. The silver key unlocked the ranch house, and inside, I found one last gift from Grandma, a studio she'd built just for me, with north-facing windows that bathed the room in perfect, soft light and views of the mountains that had always inspired my art. On the easel was a note in her handwriting, "Paint your truth, Joey. It's worth more than their lies." I stood there, overwhelmed, the weight of her love and trust settling over me like a warm embrace. 6 months later, my first solo art exhibition opened in New York, a milestone I dreamed of but never dared believe possible. The gallery was filled with my paintings, landscapes inspired by the Montana ranch, portraits capturing Grandma's spirit, abstracts born from the stories she'd shared. The mysterious buyer who purchased the entire collection for $2.3 million remained anonymous, the check drawn from a company called CLC Investments, Cecilia Louise Caldwell Investments. I smiled at the secret, knowing Grandma would have loved the irony. My siblings attended the opening, drawn by the prestige and the free champagne, already scheming to capitalize on my sudden success. I always knew you had talent, Ashley lied smoothly, her eyes calculating. We should talk about investing your earnings. Family helps family. Marcus jumped in. You could use a business manager. I'll give you the family discount. Brandon, ever the opportunist, added, or you could invest in my new venture, ground floor opportunity. I smiled over my glass of real champagne, not the cheap stuff I used to drink. That's kind of you all, I said, my voice steady. But I have excellent financial advisors. They've been managing my portfolio for years. Ashley blinked, confused. Portfolio? What portfolio? The one Grandma helped me build, I said truthfully, letting them wonder. They exchanged glances, their minds racing, but what could they do? They'd taken their millions, signed their papers, mocked the rusty key, and burned my memories. They'd made their choices. That night, I called Mr. Whitman with a new plan. I want to set up a foundation for struggling artists, I told him. Full scholarships, living stipends, no strings attached support for those who have talent but lack opportunity. Your grandmother would be proud, he said warmly. What shall we call it? I thought of the rusty key, still on my keychain, a reminder of Grandma's first apartment, of humble beginnings, of building something from nothing. The Rusty Key Foundation, I decided, for artists who have everything but opportunity. And your siblings? He asked. They got what they wanted, I replied. Money without meaning. Wealth without wisdom. Exactly what they deserve. I hung up and looked at the now empty gallery walls, each one brimming with promise. Tomorrow, I'd fly back to Montana to manage the ranch, oversee properties, and steward an empire. But tonight, I raised a glass to Grandma, the woman who saw me clearly, who gave my siblings enough rope to hang themselves with their greed, who left me a rusty key that opened every door that mattered. Thanks, Grandma, I whispered, standing alone in the gallery. Wearing her real pearl necklace, the one she'd hidden at the ranch with a note for my first exhibition, not the copy left in the jewelry box my siblings had divided. Somewhere, Marcus slept soundly in Grandma's house, never knowing it was the smallest property in her vast portfolio. Ashley dreamed of investments, oblivious that her millions were pocket change compared to the accounts she'd never know existed. Brandon polished his sports cars, unaware that I owned the dealership where he'd bought them. I held the rusty key and smiled. Grandma was right, they'd chosen their inheritance, cash they could count, spend, and waste. She'd left me something far greater, everything else. The key to her first apartment, the deed to an empire, the knowledge that being the worthless grandchild had made me the only one worthy of her trust. $3 million had bought my siblings' silence, their signatures, their willingness to write me off. It was the best investment Grandma ever made. Please feel free to comment below if you liked this. Remember to like and subscribers for more.